All the Young Dudes, James's Perspective by Stay Reams. Chapter 17. First Year, 12. Remus's 12th birthday fell on a Friday that year. Normally, Fridays after lessons meant one thing: James dragging the lot of them off to watch Gryffindor Quidditch practice. No matter how much Remus protested or how loudly Sirius complained, Remus would usually sit on the sidelines with a book, only half watching as the others got overly excited about the game. But this time, Sirius had managed to convince James to skip practice, arguing with all the persistence of a dog with a bone that Remus might want to do something different on his birthday. James had found the idea incomprehensible. What could possibly be more fun than Quidditch? But if it made Remus happy, he supposed he could endure it. Just this once. When the big day finally arrived, James and Sirius woke at the crack of dawn, immediately conspiring to drag Peter out of bed. Peter grumbled, half asleep, as I waited for the sun to creep up over the horizon. Then, with mischievous grins plastered on their faces, they crowded around Remus's bed. Sirius held up 3 fingers, mouthing a silent countdown. 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday, Lupin! They shouted in unison, leaping onto his bed with all the subtlety of a herd of hippogriffs. Remus jolted awake, his eyes wide with shock before he took in their grinning faces. He yawned, rubbing his eyes, and gave them a sleepy smile. "Cheers, lads," he mumbled, clearly still waking up. At breakfast, the spectacle continued. James and Sirius marched ahead of Remus and Peter, parting the crowds of students like Moses at the Red Sea, loudly proclaiming their arrival. "Out of the way, please! Birthday boy coming through! Move along, nothing to see here!" By the time they reached their usual seats, Remus was positively mortified, his face flushed with embarrassment, but James only grinned wider, finding his friend's discomfort endlessly amusing. They made a grand show of serving Remus his breakfast, as if he were royalty. Peter poured his tea with the utmost seriousness, James piled his plate high with all his favorites, and Sirius carefully buttered his toast with an exaggerated flourish. "Do you have to?" Remus groaned, burying his face in his hands as if he could disappear altogether. "Absolutely," James said with mock gravity. "Definitely," Peter chimed in, nodding earnestly. "Unquestionably," Sirius finished with a dramatic wave of his knife. Remus shook his head, cheeks burning, but the corners of his mouth betrayed him with a small, reluctant smile. When he finally finished his breakfast, no easy feat considering the sheer amount of food they'd heaped onto his plate, the others exchanged vicious glances and stood up as one, still grinning like idiots. "What now?" Remus asked, his eyes darting around nervously. He tried to stand, but James and Peter quickly placed firm hands on his shoulders, keeping him in his seat. Sirius, ever the theatrical one, produced a pitch pipe from his ropes with a flourish, blowing a long, piercing note. Remus squeezed his eyes shut, clearly wishing the ground would open up and swallow him whole. "Happy birthday to you," the 3 of them belted out, completely disregarding any notion of harmony. "Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Remus." The enthusiastic and decidedly off-key serenade quickly caught the attention of the rest of the hall, and soon students from all houses were joining in, much to Remus's horror. He covered his head with his hands, as if that might somehow shield him from the embarrassment. "Happy birthday to you." James, never one to miss an opportunity for drama, leapt onto his chair, thrusting his fists into the air. "Hip, hip! Hooray!" the Gryffindors chorused back, the whole table now caught up in the spectacle. James stepped down, a satisfied grin on his face, as the table erupted into laughter. Remus, though still groaning, couldn't quite hide the smile that tugged at his lips. "At least that's over and done with," Remus muttered, though his tone was more resigned than hopeful. Peter patted him on the back with a look of deep sympathy. "Sorry, mate," he said, trying and failing to suppress a grin. "But they're planning to do the same at lunch and dinner." Although James firmly believed the Marauders could achieve anything they put their minds to, there was one obstacle even they couldn't overcome: the unwavering schedule of Hogwarts. Classes couldn't be cancelled, no matter how hard they tried. And so they found themselves trudging down to the dungeons for their final lesson of the week: potions. James couldn't help the sore taste that filled his mouth as they descended the cold stone steps, a feeling only made worse by the sight of Snape glaring at them with those beady eyes, his crazy hair hanging in curtains around his sallow face. James noticed with a hint of satisfaction that Snape didn't say anything. He'd been keeping his distance since the rain prank, which made James think that perhaps, just perhaps, Snivellus had finally learned his lesson. As they entered the potions classroom, Lily caught Remus's eye and flashed him a smile, wishing him a happy birthday. James's heart gave a little lurch. He wondered if she'd remember to wish him the same on his birthday. He could only hope. But before he could dwell on that thought, he and Sirius were already halfway through their attempt to convince Professor Stockton to forgo any homework in honor of this special occasion. "Come on, Professor," Sirius wheeled, grinning his most charming grin. "It's not every day Lupin turns to wolf." Stockton chuckled, shaking his head. "Nice try, Black, but I'm afraid even birthdays don't exempt you from your studies." Despite their failure to escape homework, the Marauders more than made up for it at dinner. The loudest, most exuberant rendition of Happy Birthday yet echoed through the great hall, drawing the attention of every student and teacher. Even Dumbledore joined in, conducting the entire school with his long, bony fingers until everyone was bellowing the song at the top of their lungs. Sirius presented Remus with a card signed by all Gryffindor, and Remus grinned broadly as he read each name, clearly touched by the gesture. After dinner, they retreated to the common room, where Sirius locked down his heavy record player, a contraption James still struggled to remember the name of, and put on Electric Warrior for what felt like the 100th time since Christmas. Sirius had played it so often that even James, who usually had no patience for Muggle music, had started to recognize the tunes. "I was dancing when I was 12, crooned the singer, and James glanced over at Remus, who was quietly humming along, a small smile on his face. At some point during the evening, a cake appeared, lavishly decorated with red and gold Gryffindor icing and topped with 12 pink candles. Remus was encouraged to make a wish before cutting into it, revealing 4 different flavors inside: chocolate, lemon drizzle, Victoria sponge, and coffee and walnut. "Like your toast," Sirius explained glibly, his eyes shining with pride. "Thought you might get bored if it was all one flavor." Remus stared at the cake, then at Sirius, clearly moved. "Wow, thanks, Sirius." "So, what do you want to do for the rest of the evening?" James asked, feigning innocence. "It's still light enough if you did want to go and watch the—" "He doesn't, James," Sirius interrupted, exasperated. "Bloody hell, you're going to have to start developing some other interests, mate. You're getting boring." "I don't mind if you want to go and watch the Quidditch practice," Remus said, hurriedly, ever the peacemaker. "You've already done plenty for me today. 3 songs in one day. What more could a 12-year-old ask for?" James shook his head, trying to ignore the twinge of guilt Sirius's words had stirred. "No, Sirius is right. It's your birthday, Remus. We'll do something you like doing." An awkward silence settled over them, and James felt a flicker of unease. What did Remus like doing? It was strange, really. James could easily list off his own favorite pastimes, as well as Sirius's and Peter's. But when it came to Remus, the boy was a bit of a mystery. Whenever they weren't all together, Remus usually had his nose buried in a book, or was off somewhere doing who knows what. James suddenly realized, with a pang, that he didn't actually know what Remus got up to in his spare time. What kind of friend was he if he couldn't even name one of Remus's hobbies? "Reading," Peter suggested hesitantly. "You read a lot." "Do I?" Remus raised his eyebrows, looking genuinely surprised. James found it odd that Remus hadn't noticed it himself. It was true. Since Christmas, Remus had been devouring the set texts and could often be found in the library with a stack of borrowed books. But to James, reading didn't sound particularly thrilling, especially when they could be doing something more exciting. "Oh yeah, great," James said, sarcastically rolling his eyes. "Happy birthday, Lupin. Let's start a book club." Sirius sniggered, while Peter looked slightly annoyed. "Well, I don't know. Other than reading, you seem to really like detention, Remus." Remus laughed, holding his hands up in mock surrender. "Sorry, lads. I reckon I must be really boring." "What about when you disappear?" Sirius asked, suddenly his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. Remus stiffened, his face flushing. "What do you mean? I told you, I've been sick. I'll go to the hospital wing." Words tumbled out in a rush, and James frowned slightly. There it was, again, that odd defensiveness whenever Remus talked about his absences. Something didn't add up, but James couldn't quite put his finger on it. "No, not then. Sometimes you go off after lessons or while we're watching Quidditch," Sirius persisted. "What are you doing?" Remus shifted uncomfortably, clearly not keen on the direction the conversation had taken. "I just sort of walk around," he mumbled, avoiding their gazes. "Where, though?" Peter pressed, leaning forward. "In the grounds?" "Everywhere," Remus shrugged, sounding a bit embarrassed. "I just like to look about, so I know where stuff is." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a well-worn map, the one they'd all received at the beginning of the year. "It's stupid, but I started adding things to the map. Whenever I see something interesting, I put it in." He handed the map to James. One folded it carefully. Peter and Sirius huddled closer, peering over his shoulder. James was stunned. The map was incredibly detailed, far beyond anything the school had given them. Each portrait was labeled, staircases were color-coded, and the parchment was covered in symbols and notes, some of which James couldn't decipher, but assumed indicated secret doors or hidden passageways. The sheer amount of work Remus had put into this map was mind-boggling. James realized with a jolt that Remus had been quietly brilliant all this time. The rest of them might be loud and showy, but Remus had been doing something truly impressive right under their noses. "You've added all the portraits and labeled them and everything," Sirius said, sounding awestruck. "My spelling's rubbish," Remus muttered, blushing furiously. James frowned, thoughtfully noticing a mark on one of the staircases. "What's that?" he asked, pointing. "One of the trick steps," Remus explained, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke about his creation. "That's the one you can sink into, and that one," he pointed to another mark, "is the one that vanishes. The staircases with arrows are the ones that move. I color-coded them so you can see where they end up." "Merlin!" Peter breathed, clearly impressed. "Do you have any idea how much time this would save me? I swear I get trapped on the wrong corridor twice a week because of those flipping stairs." "And me," James agreed, nodding enthusiastically. "Sort getting to lessons on time." Sirius burst out, eyes gleaming with excitement. "Do you realize the possibilities of this map? The pranks we could pull with this!" A smile spread across James's face as he imagined the mischief they could cause. He could see Peter was already grinning too, his mind racing with ideas. But before they could get carried away, Remus's expression shuddered, and he snatched the map back, folding it quickly. "It's not finished yet," Remus said, his voice cautious. "There's loads to do. I wanted to add some spells to it once I figure out how." James reached out and placed a hand on Remus's neck, gently massaging the tense muscles. He didn't want Remus to feel embarrassed about the map. He wanted him to know that they all thought it was brilliant. They could see the hard work Remus had put into it, and James wanted to show his friend that he was here supporting him, even if Remus didn't always say much. "What sort of spells?" Sirius asked eagerly, leaning forward. Remus hesitated, and James continued to rub his neck, trying to convey through his touch that it was okay. They were his friends. They weren't going to laugh or think less of him. They were all in this together, after all. Just some improvements, Remus murmured, sounding almost hesitant, as if he was pausing himself for a bit of teasing. "You'll think it's silly." "No, we won't," Peter piped up, earnestly, his round face full of sincerity. "We can help." "I suppose. It's my map, though," Remus trailed off, looking down at the parchment as if he was worried they might not take it seriously, or worse, that they'd take it over entirely. James felt a flicker of understanding. So that was it. Remus was worried that his brilliant idea might be overshadowed by the rest of them, maybe even nicked right out from under him. James knew how large and overwhelming they could all be, especially in a group, and it must have been tough for someone like Remus, who was quieter, more thoughtful, to make himself heard. But James was absolutely certain that none of the others, brilliant as they all were, could have pulled off something like this without him. "Of course it's yours," James said, flashing his most reassuring smile. "Like the cloak is mine, right? But in the service of mischief, it's the Marauders." Sirius chimed in, practically bouncing on his feet as he leaned forward, eyes gleaming with excitement. "The Marauders' map," Remus repeated softly, almost as if testing the words out. James thought it sounded bloody fantastic, exactly the sort of thing that would go down in Hogwarts legend. "It's still yours, Lupin. We'll put your name first in everything," Sirius added, looking deadly serious about it, which only made James suppress a grin. "I'm not sure if we want our names on it," Peter muttered, glancing around nervously. Typical Peter, always worrying about getting caught. "Or nicknames, then," Sirius suggested, rolling his eyes as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "We don't have nicknames," Remus pointed out, ever the realist. "Well, I suppose I sort of do, but I really don't want Looney Lupin written on it." That set them off. The lot of them burst out laughing, the sound echoing through the empty corridor. Even Remus couldn't help but grin, the tension easing from his shoulders. When the laughter died down, Remus hesitantly unfolded the map, showing them a section on the third floor that he hadn't had time to catalogue yet. The rest of the evening was spent under James's invisibility cloak, wandering the halls like they owned the place. Technically, they weren't even out past curfew, but James and Sirius were in complete agreement they could never be too careful on a Marauder's mission. Tonight's mission was simply but effective. Dong bombs. Sirius, always prepared, had 5 of them ready to go. They had a grand time sneaking up behind unsuspecting couples who were far too wrapped up in each other to notice, or slipping them into the pockets of older students hurrying off the library. James reckoned he hadn't laughed that hard in ages. As they walked, Remus showed them everything he'd managed to uncover so far, pointing out hidden passages, shortcuts, and even a few rooms James had never noticed before. James listened, feeling both impressed and slightly confused. How on earth had Remus found all of this? Some of the places, Remus pointed out, James had walked past 100 times and never seen anything. And when Remus mentioned his plan to put some kind of tracking spell on Mrs. Norris' blasted cat, they were all over the idea. "Why stop there?" Sirius whispered eagerly, eyes shining with mischief. "Why not track everyone?" "Everyone?" James echoed, his heart speeding up with excitement. The possibilities were endless. Imagine the power of knowing exactly where everyone was at any given moment. "Yeah, then we'd know when anyone was coming. We could get away with anything." James's eyes lit up at the thought. Sirius was bright. With a map like that, there'd be nothing they couldn't do. No more narrow escapes or risky gambles. They'd be unstoppable. "I don't know," Remus replied, his voice tinged with uncertainty. James looked over at him, frowning slightly. Why was Remus so hesitant? He seemed almost worried. Was he afraid the map might get them into trouble? Or worse, get him into trouble for creating it? James felt a sudden surge of protectiveness. He'd never let that happen. Remus might be the brains behind the map, but James would make damn sure no one found out about it, not even Dumbledore. Sirius and Peter, however, were already on board, pointing out how useful it would be to see where Dumbledore was, or keep an eye on Snape. James was sure that whatever was bothering Remus, they'd be able to convince him. After all, they were the Marauders. There wasn't anything they couldn't do when they put their minds to it. And with Remus' brilliance, their determination, they'd find the bright spell. No question about it. The map would be perfect, and more importantly, it would be theirs. All of theirs.